He thought he had won. He thought stripping her of her home, her bank accounts, and her dignity was enough to break her forever. But tonight, under the glittering chandeliers of the Pierre in Manhattan, Richard Montgomery was about to learn a brutal lesson in true power. He laughed as he cornered his ex-wife near the champagne tower, loudly mocking her cheap dress and calling her a beggar in a room full of billionaires. He was so busy enjoying his cruelty that he didn't notice the hush falling over the room. He didn't know that the man walking up behind him, the recluse who owned half the city, wasn't just coming to watch. He was coming to claim her. And the announcement he was about to make would shatter Richard's world into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. The rain in New York City always felt different when you were poor. Claire Bennett remembered a time, not so long ago, when rain meant a cozy afternoon in a sprawling penthouse on the Upper East Side, watching the droplets race down the floor-to-ceiling windows while sipping imported tea. Now, as she stepped out of the subway station at 59th Street, clutching a cheap umbrella that threatened to invert with every gust of wind, the rain felt like a personal assault. It was cold, relentless, and it soaked through the hem of the only evening gown she had left. She shouldn't be here. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn around, to go back to her cramped studio apartment in Queens, where the radiator hissed and the neighbors argued through paper-thin walls. But Sophie had been insistent. "You need to get back out there, Claire," Sophie had said, her voice tinny over the phone. "It's the Sterling Foundation Gala. It's the event of the season. I have a +1. Just come. Eat the free shrimp, drink the expensive champagne, and remind yourself that you exist." Existing was the hard part. For the last 2 years since the divorce, Claire felt less like a person and more like a ghost, haunting the ruins of her own life. Richard Montgomery. Just thinking the name made her stomach turn. He hadn't just divorced her. He had erased her. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a corporate litigator who knew exactly how to hide assets and manipulate prenuptials. He had argued that Claire, who had put her career as an art curator on hold to support him through law school and manage his social standing, had contributed nothing to his success. The judge, an old golf buddy of Richard's firm partner, had agreed. Claire was left with nothing but a small settlement that barely covered her debts and the clothes on her back. Richard, meanwhile, had kept the Hamptons house, the cars, and the social circle. She tightened her grip on her clutch. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about survival. She had recently started a small freelance consulting business for art restoration, and she needed clients. The room would be filled with collectors. She just had to stay invisible to Richard and visible to everyone else. She approached the entrance of the Pierre. The gold-trimmed awning offered shelter, but the doormen looked at her suspiciously. She smoothed down her dress, a navy blue silk number she had bought 5 years ago. It was vintage now, but elegant, or at least she hoped it was. "Name?" the woman with the clipboard asked, not bothering to look up. "Claire Bennett. I'm with Sophie Miller." The woman paused, her finger tracing down the list. "Ah, yes. Ms. Miller is already inside. You may proceed." Walking into the ballroom was like stepping into a different universe. The air smelled of expensive perfume, lilies, and money. A string quartet played softly in the corner, drowned out by the murmur of New York's elite. Claire scanned the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw faces she recognized from the tabloids: tech moguls, heiresses, politicians. She spotted Sophie near the bar, waving frantically. Sophie was wearing a bright red dress that screamed confidence, something Claire felt she had lost entirely. "You made it," Sophie squealed, hugging her. "And you look classic, very old Hollywood. I look like I'm wearing my closet's history, Claire muttered, taking the glass of champagne Sophie shoved into her hand. Is he here? Sophie's smile faltered. Okay, don't panic. Yes, Richard is here. And he brought Jessica. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Jessica. The 24-year-old paralegal Richard had sworn was just a colleague until the day he served Claire the divorce papers. I can't do this, Claire whispered. Yes, you can, Sophie hissed, gripping her arm. Look at me. You are Claire Bennett. You have more taste in your pinky finger than Jessica has in her entire silicone body. We are going to stand here. We are going to network, and you are going to get a client. Ignore them. Claire nodded, taking a steadying breath. She could do this. She took a sip of champagne and turned her back to the entrance, focusing on the room. To her right, a group of elderly men were discussing a merger. To her left, a woman in a dazzling emerald necklace was laughing at a joke. But Claire's eyes were drawn to the far end of the room, where a heavy velvet curtain separated the VIP section from the rest of the gala. Who's back there? Claire asked. That? Sophie glanced over. That's the Sterling private enclosure. Harrison Sterling is rumored to be here tonight. Harrison Sterling. The name was a legend. He was the billionaire scion of the Sterling dynasty. Shipping, tech, real estate. He owned half the skyline. But he was notoriously private. He hadn't been photographed in public in 3 years, not since the tragic death of his sister. He was a phantom, a man who moved mountains without ever being seen. He won't come out, Sophie said, dismissing it. He writes the check and leaves out the back door. But hey, if you catch him, pitch your restoration services. I hear he has a Vermeer he doesn't know what to do with. Claire managed a weak smile. It was a joke, of course. People like Harrison Sterling didn't talk to people like Claire Bennett. She spent the next hour maneuvering through the crowd, handing out business cards with trembling hands. She managed to have a decent conversation with an art dealer from Chelsea who seemed interested in her expertise on 18th century canvas repair. For a moment, she felt a spark of her old self. Competent, intelligent, worthy. She was just beginning to relax when she heard it. That laugh. It was a sharp, barking laugh that cut through the ambient noise like a knife. Claire froze. She knew that laugh better than her own heartbeat. She slowly turned around. Standing 10 feet away, holding court with a circle of sycophants, was Richard. He looked older, his face slightly puffier, but he wore a tuxedo that cost more than Claire's annual rent. Clinging to his arm was Jessica, wearing a dress so sparkly it hurt to look at. Claire tried to shrink into the shadow of a pillar, but it was too late. Richard's eyes, cold and predatory, swept the room and landed squarely on her. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed. He said something to Jessica, who giggled and covered her mouth, looking directly at Claire. He began to walk toward her. "Run!" her instincts screamed. But her feet were led. She wasn't going to run. She had done nothing wrong. Richard stopped right in front of her, invading her personal space. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. "Claire," he said, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of the people nearby. "I didn't realize the event organizers were letting in the general public tonight." "Hello, Richard," Claire said, her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands. "I'm here as a guest." "A guest?" Richard chuckled, looking her up and down with exaggerated pity. "Whose guest? Or did you sneak in through the kitchen? I know times have been tough for you since the gravy train stopped." Jessica stepped forward, smirking. "Oh, Richie, be nice. Maybe she's here to apply for a waitressing job. I heard they're short-staffed." The couple next to them, a prominent senator and his wife, stopped talking and watched. Claire felt the heat rising in her cheeks. This was exactly what he wanted, a public shaming, a reminder of her place. "I'm here for business, Richard," Claire said, lifting her chin. "Something you wouldn't understand unless it involves destroying someone else's life." Richard's face hardened. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only she and the unfortunate bystanders could hear. "Business? You have no business, Claire. You have nothing. You are nothing. I made you, and I broke you. You're wearing a dress from 5 years ago and reeking of desperation. Do yourself a favor and leave before security drags you out. You're embarrassing yourself." Claire felt tears pricking her eyes, hot and angry. She opened her mouth to retort, to defend herself, but the words stuck in her throat. The weight of his wealth, his influence, and the staring crowd was suffocating. She was about to turn and flee, to give him the satisfaction, when the room suddenly went quiet. Not the polite lull of conversation, but a sudden, heavy silence that started at the front of the room and rippled backward like a wave. The heavy velvet curtains of the VIP section parted. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Pierre was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster or the entrance of a king. Even Richard, who was midway through formulating another insult about Claire's pathetic little life, clamped his mouth shut and turned toward the commotion. Emerging from the velvet-roped sanctuary was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in midnight. Harrison Sterling was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of a tuxedo that was clearly bespoke, likely from Savile Row. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples, and his face was a map of sharp angles and intense, brooding features. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were a piercing, icy blue, sweeping over the crowd with an air of bored detachment. He wasn't alone. Flanked by 2 burly security guards and his personal assistant, a frantic-looking man named Timothy, Harrison moved with a predator's grace. The crowd parted for him instantly, creating a wide corridor through the center of the ballroom. "My God," Sophie whispered, appearing at Claire's elbow. "He actually came out." Claire couldn't look away. She had never seen Harrison Sterling in person, only in grainy paparazzi photos or business journals. In person, the energy radiating off him was terrifying. It was raw power. Richard, sensing an opportunity to climb the social ladder, immediately straightened his posture. He adjusted his cufflinks and ran a hand through his hair. "Watch this," Richard muttered to Jessica, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "I'm going to introduce us. His firm is looking for new legal representation for their merger with TechCore. This is the moment." "Richard, don't," Claire said, her voice low. "He looks busy." "Quiet, Claire," Richard snapped, not even looking at her. "Go find the buffet. Let the adults talk." As Harrison Sterling moved closer, his path seemed to be leading him straight toward the champagne tower and straight toward them. Richard stepped out into the aisle, blocking the billionaire's path. It was a bold move, a stupid move. "Mr. Sterling," Richard boomed, extending his hand with a practiced, oily smile. "Richard Montgomery, senior partner at Montgomery and Halloway. It is an absolute honor to finally meet the man behind the myth." The procession stopped. Harrison Sterling looked down at Richard's extended hand as if it were a dead fish offered to him on a plate. He didn't take it. He slowly raised his eyes to meet Richard's face. The look was withering. "Do I know you?" Harrison asked. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth but cold as liquid nitrogen. Richard faltered only for a second. "Well, not personally, sir, but my firm handled the acquisition of the dockets for you." "I don't care," Harrison interrupted, He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You're in my way." A few people in the crowd stifled giggles. Richard's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with the red carpet. He dropped his hand, but his ego wouldn't let him retreat gracefully. He needed to save face, especially with Claire watching. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Richard said, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "I just wanted to ensure you were enjoying the evening. We were just dealing with a bit of a situation here." Richard gestured vaguely toward Claire, deciding to use her as a scapegoat to create a bond with the billionaire. Common enemy tactics. "A situation?" Harrison asked. For the first time, his eyes shifted from Richard. He looked past the lawyer's shoulder and locked eyes with Claire. Claire felt her breath hitch. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She was standing there in her old dress, clutching her cheap purse, humiliated by her ex-husband, and now staring down the most powerful man in New York. "Yes," Richard continued, oblivious to the change in the air. "Just some riff-raff that slipped past security. My ex-wife, actually. She's been pestering the guests, trying to solicit money. It's embarrassing, really. I was just telling her she needs to leave before she ruins the atmosphere for people of our caliber." Jessica chimed in, hooking her arm through Richard's. "It's true. She's practically begging for drinks. It's so sad." Harrison Sterling stared at Claire. His expression was unreadable. He looked at her frayed hem, her white-knuckled grip on her clutch, and the unshed tears shimmering in her eyes. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Then Harrison took a step forward. He bypassed Richard entirely, brushing past him as if he were a piece of furniture. He stopped directly in front of Claire. He was so close she could smell him. Sandalwood, rain, and something uniquely masculine. He towered over her, blocking out the rest of the room, blocking out Richard. "Claire," Harrison said. The use of her name sent a shockwave through the crowd. Richard's jaw dropped. Sophie gasped. Claire blinked, confused. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I didn't mean to cause a scene. I was just leaving." "Leaving?" Harrison repeated. He tilted his head slightly. "Why would you leave? You haven't even danced yet." I don't," Claire stammered. Her mind was racing. How did he know her name? Had they met? No, she would remember this man. Harrison turned slowly to face Richard. The look of boredom was gone, replaced by a simmering intensity that looked a lot like rage. "Mr. Montgomery, was it?" Harrison asked softly. Yes, Richard Montgomery," Richard said, hope rekindling in his eyes. He thought the billionaire was siding with him. "As I said, she's a nuisance. I can have security remove her so we can discuss—" "You said she was pestering guests," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. "You said she was riff-raff." "Well, look at her," Richard scoffed, gesturing to Claire. "She's wearing a rag. She's destitute. She doesn't belong here, among us." Harrison stared at Richard for a long moment. Then he let out a short, dark laugh. "It is fascinating," Harrison said, addressing the room at large, "how blind some men can be." He turned back to Claire. With a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man of his stature, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm and reassuring. "Mr. Montgomery," Harrison said, his voice ringing out clearly across the silent ballroom. "You seem to be under a severe misapprehension. You believe this woman is here to beg." Harrison pulled Claire slightly closer to him. She was too stunned to resist. She looked up at him, searching for answers, but his profile was hard as stone. "Let me clarify the situation for you," Harrison continued, his eyes drilling into Richard. "Claire isn't crashing this party, and she certainly isn't begging." Harrison paused for effect. He raised Claire's hand, tucking it into the crook of his arm. "Everyone has been asking why I came out of seclusion tonight," Harrison announced. "Why the Sterling Foundation is suddenly shifting its focus to art preservation and cultural history." He looked down at Claire, and for the first time, a genuine soft smile touched his lips. It transformed his face from terrifying to breathtaking. "I am here," Harrison said, "because my fiancée asked me to be." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Fiancée. Richard choked on his own spit. "Your what?" "My fiancée," Harrison repeated, his voice steel. "Claire is the future Mrs. Sterling, and as far as I am concerned, Mr. Montgomery, the only person who doesn't belong in this room is you." The word fiancé didn't just hang in the air, it detonated. For a split second, the ballroom was a vacuum, devoid of sound or breath. Then the whispers started. It began as a low hum, like a hive of bees disturbed, rapidly escalating into a cacophony of shocked gasps, hushed speculation, and the frantic tapping of phones as the news was beamed across the city's social networks. Harrison Sterling is engaged to Richard Montgomery's discard pile. Richard looked like he had been struck in the face with a shovel. His expensive tan faded into a sickly shade of grey. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. Beside him, Jessica's sparkly dress seemed to dim. She looked from Richard's devastated face to Harrison's imposing figure, and her grip on Richard's arm loosened significantly. Claire felt the blood rushing in her ears. The room was spinning. She was acutely aware of Harrison's arm, hard and warm beneath her trembling hand. She tried to pull away, terrified of the retribution that would surely come when this cruel joke was revealed. But Harrison clamped his other hand over hers, trapping it against his bicep. His grip was iron, a silent command. "Do not move. Do not break character." That's impossible," Richard finally managed to choke out. His voice was high and thin, stripped of all its usual bravado. "You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke. You've never even met her." Harrison's expression didn't shift, but the temperature around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at Richard, not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of an exterminator looking at a cockroach. "Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Montgomery?" Harrison asked softly. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. To call Harrison Sterling a liar in his own city, at an event he was bankrolling, was professional suicide. "No, sir, Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. She's a nobody. She has nothing. Why would a man like you want a woman like her?" Harrison's jaw tightened. For the first time, Claire felt a tremor of genuine anger run through the man beside her. It wasn't acting. "What she has, Richard," Harrison said, his voice cutting through the noise of the room, "is integrity, class, and a resilience you couldn't possibly understand because you've never had to fight for anything in your miserable, inherited life." Harrison turned his head slightly to his assistant, Timothy, who materialized instantly at his elbow with an iPad at the ready. "Timothy," Harrison said, never taking his eyes off Richard, "regarding the legal representation for the TechCore merger. Make a note. Montgomery and Halloway are permanently blacklisted from any future Sterling Enterprises contracts, subsidiaries, or personal holdings." Richard made a strangled noise in the back of his throat. That contract was worth millions. It was supposed to be his ticket to the managing partner's desk. Furthermore, Harrison continued calmly, "Contact the boards of our current major partners. Inform them that I am personally re-evaluating our relationship with any firm that employs Richard Montgomery. I don't do business with men who abuse women to feel powerful." It was total annihilation. In 30 seconds, Harrison hadn't just defended Claire, he had burned Richard's career to the ground and salted the earth. The elite crowd around them watched with wide eyes, silently recalculating their alliances. Richard Montgomery was now radioactive. Jessica, sensing the sinking ship, physically took a step away from Richard. He looked at her, betrayed, then back at Harrison, utterly defeated. "Mr. Sterling, please," Richard whispered, his eyes watering. I apologize. I didn't know." "You didn't know she was mine," Harrison corrected coldly. "If she wasn't, you felt it was acceptable to treat her like garbage. That tells me everything I need to know about you. Get out of my sight." Richard looked around for support, but faces turned away. He was alone. Broken, he turned and shuffled toward the exit, a pariah in a tuxedo. Jessica hesitated for a moment, looked at the back of Richard's head, then looked at the billionaires remaining, and slinked off toward the bar, abandoning him. The drama concluded. The eyes of the room turned back to the new power couple. Claire felt like a deer caught in 1,000 headlights. She was shaking uncontrollably now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving terror in its wake. "Harrison," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Please, I'm going to faint. You have to stop this." Harrison looked down at her. The terrifying mask of the titan of industry melted away, replaced by a look of intense, focused concern. "Not yet," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that only she could hear. "If you faint now, they'll think you're weak. We have to finish the scene." "What scene?" she pleaded. "The grand exit." Before Claire could protest, Harrison swept her toward the center of the room. The string quartet, sensing the shift in mood, awkwardly transitioned into a waltz. "Dance with me," Harrison commanded, though it sounded more like a request. "I can't," Claire breathed. "My legs won't work." "They will. Just follow my lead. Lean on me. I won't let you fall." He pulled her into a traditional waltz hold. His right hand was firm on her waist, burning through the thin silk of her old dress. As they began to move, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. It was surreal. Claire Bennett, the disgraced divorcee with $74 in her bank account, was waltzing in the arms of the most elusive billionaire in New York, under the chandeliers of the Pierre, while the people who had shunned her for 2 years watched in envy. For a few minutes, she allowed herself to get lost in the illusion. Harrison was an impeccable dancer. He moved with a surprising lightness, guiding her effortlessly through the turns. He kept his eyes locked on hers, creating a private bubble that shut out the rest of the room. It felt dangerously real. As the music swelled to a crescendo, Harrison spun her toward the velvet curtains of the VIP area. "Smile, Claire," he whispered as they reached the threshold. "Give them something to talk about tomorrow, besides your ex-husband's funeral." Claire managed a shaky, tremulous smile for the cameras that were suddenly flashing in their direction. Then, Harrison pulled her through the heavy curtains, drowning out the music, the stares, and the madness. They were alone. The VIP area wasn't just a roped-off section. It was a private sanctuary hidden behind the ballroom. It opened onto a sprawling stone balcony overlooking Central Park, the city lights twinkling through the rain-streaked glass doors. The air here was cooler, quieter. As soon as the curtain fell back into place, Harrison released her. Claire immediately stumbled, her knees buckling. She grabbed the back of a velvet armchair to keep from hitting the floor. "Breathe," Harrison said. His voice was different now, businesslike, clipped. The tender fiancé act vanished the second they were out of the public eye. He walked over to a private bar set up in the corner and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. Claire gasped for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched him as he approached, offering her a glass. "Drink. It's brandy. It will stop the shaking." Claire stared at the glass, then up at him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "And what have you done?" "I am Harrison Sterling, and I believe I just saved you from a very unpleasant evening," he said calmly, taking a sip of his own drink. "Saved me?" Claire found her voice, fueled by a sudden surge of adrenaline and indignation. She ignored the brandy. "You just told the entire upper crust of Manhattan that I'm your fiancé. That's not saving me. That's insanity. Do you know what Richard will do when he finds out it's a lie? He'll destroy me completely this time." "He won't," Harrison said, setting his glass down with a sharp click. "Because it won't be a lie. Not entirely." Claire stared at him, blank. "I don't understand." Harrison sighed, unbuttoning his tuxedo jacket and running a hand through his perfect hair, ruffling it slightly. It made him look human for the first time. He gestured to the armchair. "Sit down, Claire. We have business to discuss." "We have no business," she retorted, though she sank into the chair anyway, because her legs refused to support her. "I don't know you. I'm a freelance art restorer living in Queens. You're you." "Precisely," Harrison said. He leaned against the heavy oak table, crossing his long legs. He studied her with that same unnerving, analytical gaze he had used in the ballroom. "You are Claire Bennett, formerly curator at the Met, specializing in Renaissance textiles and 17th century Dutch painting. Your eye for forgery is legendary. You put your career on hold for 4 years to support a husband who, statistically speaking, possessed inferior intellect and drive. Since your divorce, you have been systematically blacklisted by the gallery circuit due to his influence." Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp night air. "How do you know all that?" "I know everything about people I intend to hire." "Hire?" Claire frowned. "You want me to restore a painting? You did this whole charade just to hire me for a job?" Harrison almost smiled. It was a dry, humorless twitch of the lips. "In a manner of speaking, I need you to restore something, yes." "My reputation." Claire just stared at him. Harrison pushed off the table and walked toward the glass doors, looking out at the rain-soaked city. "I am acquiring Anderson Medical," he said, as if discussing the weather. "It's a massive merger. The Anderson family has owned it for 4 generations. They are old money, very traditional, very European conservative. They don't like me. They think I'm a cold-blooded corporate raider with no attachments, no humanity. A lone wolf is the term they used in the board meeting." He turned back to face her. The intensity in his eyes was back. "They are threatening to block the sale because they don't trust my character. They want to sell to a family man, someone stable, someone respectable." The realization hit Claire slowly, like icy water dripping down her spine. You need a wife," she whispered. "I need a fiancé," Harrison corrected. "A wife is too permanent. An engagement shows intent. It shows softening. It shows humanity." "But why me?" Claire stood up, her hands clenching into fists. "You could have any woman in that room out there. Supermodels, heiresses, women who know how to play this game." "Those women come with baggage," Harrison said dismissively. "They want fame. They want to attach their brand to mine. Or they have fathers who will try to leverage the connection. You, Claire, are perfect." He began to tick points off on his fingers. 1. You are desperate. Richard has seen to that. You need money, and you need protection. I can offer both. Claire flinched, but she couldn't deny it. 2. Your reputation, despite Richard's efforts, is actually spotless among the people who matter. The serious collectors know you are brilliant and that you were wronged. You bring a quiet dignity that the Anderson family will respect. You're not a showgirl. You're an intellectual. He took a step closer to her. And 3, you hate Richard Montgomery as much as I despise bullies. You have motivation to make this work, to prove him wrong. Claire felt cornered. He had dissected her life and laid it bare. It was terrifying, but also oddly validating. He saw her value when no one else did. "What is the proposal?" she asked, her voice steadying. If this was business, she could handle business. Harrison's eyes gleamed with approval. "A contract," he said. 6 months. You act as my fiancée. You attend events with me. You smile for the cameras. You charm the Anderson board members at dinner parties. You wear the ring I give you. In public, we are devoted. In private, we live separate lives. I have a townhouse on the Upper East Side you will move into. It has a fully equipped restoration studio on the top floor." He paused, letting the bait dangle. A studio. Her own studio. "In return," Harrison continued, his voice dropping low, "I will pay off every debt Richard saddled you with. I will provide you with a monthly stipend that will make your current annual income look like pocket change. And when the 6 months are up and the merger is complete, we will stage a quiet, amicable breakup. You will walk away with enough seed money to open your own gallery anywhere in the world, and a client list provided by me that will ensure you never have to beg for work again." It was a deal with the devil. It was selling her soul, her identity for security. It was insane. "And Richard?" Claire asked. "What happens to him?" Harrison's expression darkened. The memory of Richard's hand on Claire's arm in the ballroom seemed to flash in his eyes. "Richard is already finished," Harrison said coldly. "But if you agree to this, I will ensure that by the time our 6 months are up, he won't just be blacklisted. He will be irrelevant. You will be the one standing tall, Claire. You will win." He held out his hand. It was the same gesture Richard had made earlier, but this time the power dynamic was vastly different. "So, Claire Bennett," Billionaire Harrison Sterling asked, his blue eyes locking onto hers, "do we have a deal?" The townhouse on East 64th Street was less of a home and more of a fortress disguised as a palace. Claire had been living there for 3 weeks, yet she still felt like an intruder waiting for the alarm to sound. Harrison had been true to every word of his sterile, ironclad contract. Her debts were paid, her credit score was restored, and on the top floor, bathed in the cool, consistent light of north-facing windows, was a restoration studio that rivaled the labs at the Smithsonian. It was stocked with the finest pigments, solvents, and microscopes money could buy. But the separate lives clause was proving to be complicated. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Claire, wearing a silk robe that had been part of the wardrobe update Harrison's team had insisted upon, walked into the kitchen to find Harrison already there. He was leaning against the marble island, reading a dossier, a cup of black coffee in hand. He was shirtless. Claire froze in the doorway. It was the first time she had seen him without the armor of a bespoke suit. He was heavily muscled, his skin marked with a few faint scars that hinted at a life before the boardrooms, or perhaps the brutal nature of the boardrooms themselves. "Good morning," Harrison said without looking up, though he shifted slightly to cover the dossier. I didn't know you were still here," Claire stammered, tightening her robe. "I usually wait until the driver takes you to the office." "Change of plans," Harrison said, finally looking at her. His eyes lingered for a fraction of a second too long before snapping back to professional neutrality. "Tonight is the Anderson dinner. We need to synchronize." Claire felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The Anderson dinner. This was the main event. If they failed tonight, the merger would collapse, and their deal would likely dissolve along with it. "I've memorized the files on the board members," Claire said, walking over to the coffee machine, keeping a safe distance from him. "Lars Anderson prefers sailing. His wife, Greta, is the decision-maker, though she lets Lars do the talking. She collects 19th century impressionism." "Good," Harrison said. "But facts aren't enough. Greta Anderson is a human lie detector. She values soul over statistics. If she senses we are a transaction, she will kill the deal." He put the cup down. "We need a story. The gala was our public debut, but we can't tell them we got engaged that night. It looks impulsive. We need a history." "A meet-cute?" Claire asked dryly. "Precisely. I was thinking we met at an auction in London 2 years ago. We were bidding on the same painting." "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "Too cliché, and easy to fact-check. If we were both bidding, there would be a record." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You have a better idea?" "The Met," Claire said, turning to face him. 3 years ago, I was curating the Dutch Masters exhibit. You came in for a private viewing after hours. I was on a ladder, adjusting the lighting on a Rembrandt. You thought I was a technician and asked me to move out of the way. I told you that without the proper lighting, the painting was just expensive canvas. We argued about the nature of perception versus value." Harrison stared at her. The silence stretched, and Claire worried she had overstepped. "That," Harrison said slowly, a spark of amusement in his eyes, "is remarkably detailed, and it sounds exactly like something I would do." "And exactly like something I would say," Claire added. "Fine. We met at the Met. We kept it private because of my sister's passing and your complications with Richard. We reconnected fully 6 months ago." "Agreed. One more thing," Harrison said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He slid it across the marble counter. Claire opened it. Inside sat a diamond that was frankly obscene. It was an emerald-cut stone, flawless, flanked by tapered baguettes. It was heavy enough to anchor a boat. "Harrison, I can't," she whispered. "This is too much. What if I lose it?" "It's insured," he said dismissively. "Put it on. The Andersons will expect a symbol of my devotion, and nothing says devotion in their world like 10 carats. Claire slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It felt cold and heavy, a shackle made of light. "It fits," she murmured. "I had it resized," Harrison said. He finished his coffee in one gulp. "Be ready at 6 hours. Wear the green dress. It brings out your eyes." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving Claire staring at the ring, wondering how a man so cold could notice the color of her eyes. The dinner was held at the Anderson estate in Greenwich. It was an old money fortress of stone and ivy. The dining room was lit by candlelight, casting long shadows against the oil paintings on the walls. The atmosphere was stifling. Lars Anderson, a bluff man with a red face, was talking loudly about tax loopholes. Greta Anderson, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, sat silently at the head of the table, watching Harrison and Claire like a hawk. "So," Greta said, her voice cutting through her husband's monologue. "Harrison Sterling finally settles down. I must admit, I didn't think it was possible. You've always been so singular." Harrison reached out and took Claire's hand on the table, his thumb tracing a soothing circle on her knuckles. "I just hadn't met anyone who challenged me, Greta. Until Claire." "Is that so?" Greta turned her gaze to Claire. "And how do you handle him, my dear?" "He is a steamroller," "I don't stand in front of the steamroller, Mrs. Anderson," Claire said, smiling calmly. "I drive it, or at least I tell him which road to pave." Lars chuckled, but Greta didn't smile. Her eyes drifted to the painting, hanging behind Claire's head. "Do you like it?" Greta asked abruptly. "It's a new acquisition, a Turner." Claire turned to look at the painting. It was a seascape, swirling with chaotic yellows and storms. She studied it for a moment, her heart sinking. "It's dramatic," Claire said carefully. "But," Greta pressed, "I hear you are an expert, Miss Bennet. Don't patronize me with dramatic." Claire looked at Harrison. He gave her a subtle nod. "Trust your instincts." "It's a beautiful painting," Claire said, turning back to Greta. "But it's not a Turner." The room went deathly silent. Lars dropped his fork. "Excuse me," Greta whispered. "We bought that from a reputable dealer in Paris. We have certificates of authenticity." "The brushwork in the lower left quadrant," Claire explained, her voice gaining confidence. "Turner used a very specific layering technique for his sea foam, scumbling white over dry blue. This painter used a wet-on-wet technique. It's too smooth, and the yellow pigment, Turner's chrome yellow, degrades over time. This yellow is chemically stable. It's too bright for the period. It's likely a very talented student or a mid-19th century imitator. It's stunning, but it's not a Turner." Lars turned purple. "Now look here, young lady." "Wait," Greta commanded. She stood up, walked over to the painting, and peered at the corner Claire had mentioned. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned back to the table. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "You are absolutely right," Greta said. "I told Lars it was too bright. I told the dealer it felt wrong. But no one listened. They all just saw the signature and the price tag." She looked at Harrison. "She has a good eye, Harrison. An honest eye. That is rare in our world. Most people would have just complimented my taste to get the signature on the contract." "Claire is incapable of lying about art," Harrison said, raising his glass to her. "It's one of the things I love about her." Claire blushed, not from the wine, but from the way Harrison said love. It sounded frighteningly sincere. "Well," Greta said, sitting back down, "if you trust her judgment this much, perhaps I can trust your judgment with my company. Let's discuss the merger terms over dessert." Under the table, Harrison squeezed Claire's hand so hard it almost hurt. It was a squeeze of victory. The merger went through. The headlines the next day were jubilant. Sterling acquires Anderson Medical. Stock soars. But the sidebar stories were all about the mystery fiancée who had charmed the iron-willed Greta Anderson. Life in the townhouse settled into a strange rhythm. Claire worked in the studio during the day, restoring the Vermeer Harrison had indeed owned, and which needed desperate cleaning. In the evenings, they attended galas, operas, and charity events. They moved as a unit. They developed inside jokes. They argued about politics. The line between the act and reality was becoming dangerously thin. Claire found herself waiting for the sound of his key in the door. Harrison had started bringing her coffee in the studio, staying to watch her work for 20 minutes at a time, in silence. But outside their bubble, the storm was gathering. Richard Montgomery had not gone quietly into the night. He had been fired from his firm 2 days after the gala. He was hemorrhaging money and social standing. Desperation is a dangerous fuel, and Richard was running on a full tank. It was 3 months into the arrangement. Claire was hosting her first solo exhibition, a showcase of restored works funded by the Sterling Foundation. It was being held at a trendy gallery in Chelsea. The night was going perfectly. The critics were raving about her restoration of the Vermeer. Harrison stood by her side, playing the proud fiancé to perfection. "You did this," Harrison whispered in her ear as she accepted a bouquet of roses from a well-wisher. "This is all your talent, Claire." "I couldn't have done it without the studio," she replied, smiling up at him. "Or the backing." "The backing just turned the lights on. You provided the art." Suddenly, a commotion at the entrance broke the mood. Voices were raised. Security was shouting, "I have a right to be here. She's my wife." Claire's blood ran cold. "Richard." He burst into the gallery, looking disheveled. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He pushed past a security guard and stumbled into the center of the room. "Richard," Harrison said, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped in front of Claire instantly, shielding her. "You are trespassing. I suggest you leave before you are arrested." "Arrested?" Richard laughed, a manic, broken sound. "For what? Trying to save these people from a fraud?" He turned to the crowd, pointing a shaking finger at Claire, peeking from behind Harrison. "You think she's a genius?" Richard shouted. "You think she restored these paintings? She's a fake, a thief." The room went silent. iPhones were raised, recording every second. "She didn't restore that Vermeer," Richard spat. "She stole it. She switched it. The painting on that wall is a forgery she painted herself. She sold the original on the black market years ago to pay off her gambling debts. That's why we divorced. I tried to cover for her, but I can't let her con the great Harrison Sterling too." It was a lie so audacious, so specific, that it momentarily stunned everyone. "That is insane." Claire stepped out from behind Harrison, her voice trembling with rage. "I have never gambled in my life, and the provenance of that painting is impeccable." "Is it?" Richard sneered. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "I have a sworn affidavit from a private dealer in Macau who says you approached him 3 years ago. You're a con artist, Claire. You always were." The crowd murmured. Doubt is a powerful virus. Once planted, it spreads instantly. Harrison didn't look at the paper. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Richard with a calmness that was terrifying. "Richard," Harrison said, "you are flailing." "Ask her," Richard screamed. "Ask her to prove the painting is real right now. She can't, because she's a fraud." Harrison turned to Claire. He looked deep into her eyes. In that moment, Claire realized the terrifying fragility of her situation. If Harrison doubted her, even for a second, it was over. She was the poor ex-wife. He was the billionaire. If he cut ties now to save face, she would be destroyed. "Harrison," she whispered, "it's a lie." Harrison held her gaze. Then he turned back to Richard. "I don't need to ask her," Harrison said, his voice ringing through the gallery, "because I watched her restore it. Every stroke, every layer. For 3 months. "You're lying for her," Richard yelled. "She's got you wrapped around her finger." "No," Harrison said. "I'm stating a fact. But if you want proof, Richard, let's get proof." Harrison walked over to the Vermeer. He gestured to the gallery owner. "Bring me a UV light and a microscope. Now!" The owner scrambled to obey. "Claire," Harrison said. "Show them." Claire understood. She walked to the painting. Her hands were steady now. This was her domain. This was her truth. When the equipment arrived, Claire turned on the UV light. The painting glowed with a ghostly fluorescence. "See that?" Claire pointed to a patch of dark varnish near the frame. "That is a specific polymer blend I use to stabilize the canvas edges. It contains a microscopic tracer signature unique to my studio. It's my signature. It's invisible to the naked eye, but under 500x magnification, you will see the date and my initials embedded in the molecular structure of the resin." She adjusted the microscope and stepped back. "Look." An art critic from the New York Times stepped forward first. He looked through the lens. He gasped. "It's there," the critic announced. "CB 2025. And, my God, you can see the original canvas weave underneath. It's the original painting. The restoration is just surface protection. It's brilliant." The room erupted into whispers of awe, not suspicion. Harrison walked up to Richard, who was now trembling, his face pale as a sheet. "You accused my fiancée of theft," Harrison said softly. "You accused her of fraud. You brought a forged affidavit into my gallery." Harrison signaled to his security team. "This man has just confessed to defamation and attempted extortion in front of 50 witnesses," Harrison said. "Hold him for the police." "No, wait!" Richard cried, as the guards grabbed his arms. "Harrison, please! I'm broke! I just needed—" "You needed to break her," Harrison interrupted. "And you failed. Take him away." As Richard was dragged out, screaming and kicking, the gallery burst into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation for Claire. She stood there, stunned. She had won. Not just the argument, but the war. She felt a hand on her waist. Harrison pulled her close. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. I think so," Claire breathed. "Thank you. For trusting me." Harrison looked down at her, and for a moment they forgot the crowd. "I didn't trust you, Claire," he said intensely. "I knew you. There is a difference." And in that moment, in the middle of a crowded room in Chelsea, the contract stopped the mattering. The 6-month expiration date stopped mattering. Harrison leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a show kiss. It wasn't for the cameras. It was hungry, possessive, and desperate. And when Claire kissed him back, gripping the lapels of his tuxedo, she knew one terrified, exhilarated truth. She wasn't pretending anymore. The 6-month mark didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with the quiet click of a suitcase latch. It was raining again in New York, a heavy grey downpour that mirrored the weather the night Claire had walked into the Pierre. But everything else had changed. Claire Bennett was no longer the destitute divorcee. She was the sterling muse, the woman who had brought down a corrupt lawyer and charmed the city's elite. Her bank account was full, her reputation restored, and her future bright. So why did she feel like she was dying? Claire stood in the center of the master bedroom in the townhouse, looking at the 2 suitcases by the door. The contract was fulfilled. The Anderson merger was finalized last week. Richard was currently out on bail, awaiting trial for extortion and fraud, his career reduced to ash. Harrison had upheld every single term of their agreement. It was time to go. She walked over to the vanity and picked up the ring. The 10-carat diamond caught the dim light, flashing with a cold, indifferent brilliance. She had worn it for 180 days. It had felt like a part of her hand. Now, taking it off, felt like amputation. "You're early." The voice came from the doorway. Claire jumped, spinning around. Harrison stood there. He was supposed to be at a board meeting. He was wearing his suit, but his tie was loosened, and he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there when they started this. "I wanted to be out before you got home," Claire said, her voice tight. "I didn't want to drag it out. The movers are coming for the studio equipment tomorrow." Harrison walked into the room. He didn't look at the suitcases. He looked only at her. "The contract expires at midnight," he said. "Technically, you still have 12 hours. "There's no point in technicalities, Harrison," Claire said, forcing a smile that felt like glass shards. "We won. You got your company. I got my life back. It was a successful transaction." "A transaction," Harrison repeated dully. "Yes, that's what we agreed on." Claire held out the ring. "Here, I believe this belongs to the vault." Harrison looked at the ring in her palm. He didn't take it. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked over to the window, staring out at the rain. "Did you know," he started, his voice low, "that I bought this townhouse 3 years ago, before I ever met you?" "I thought you bought it for the charade," Claire said, confused. "No, I bought it because it felt empty. Just like the penthouse, just like the Hamptons estate. I filled it with furniture, with art, with security systems. But it was always just a house. It never had a pulse." He turned around. The intensity in his eyes was back, but the wall of ice was gone. It was raw, open vulnerability. "For the last 6 months, Claire, this house has had a pulse. It smells like turpentine and vanilla. I hear you humming when you work upstairs. I see your shoes kicked off in the hallway. I wake up in the morning, and for the first time in my life, I don't dread the silence, because I know you're just down the hall." Claire's heart began to hammer against her ribs. "Harrison, don't. Please, don't make this harder. We had a deal." "Screw the deal," Harrison growled. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, ignoring the suitcases, ignoring the space between them. He stopped inches from her. "You think this was just a game to me? A strategy?" he asked. "Claire, I destroyed Richard Montgomery not because it was good PR, but because the thought of him hurting you made me want to burn the city down. I stood in that gallery and watched you defend your work, and I didn't see a business partner. I saw the only woman I have ever respected, the only woman I have ever wanted." Claire's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and fast. "But you never said— You always talked about the contract, the expiration date." "Because I was a coward," Harrison admitted. "I deal in billions, Claire. I buy countries. But telling you that I was falling in love with you, that was terrifying. I was terrified that once the debt was paid, once you didn't need my protection anymore, you would leave. I thought—" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I thought you only tolerated me because you had to." "Tolerated you?" Claire let out a choked laugh. She reached out, touching his face, her thumb tracing his cheekbone. "Harrison, I fell in love with you the night you danced with me at the Pierre. Not because you were rich, but because you looked at me when everyone else looked through me. You saw me." Harrison's eyes snapped back to hers. "Say that again." "I love you," she whispered. Harrison didn't waste another second. He grabbed her hand, the one holding the ring, and crushed it to his chest. Then he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate kiss of the gallery. It was a promise. It was deep, slow, and full of a relief so profound it made her knees weak. When he finally pulled back, he took the ring from her palm. "This ring," he said, holding it up, "was a prop. It was for the Andersons. It was for the cameras." He walked over to the window, opened it, and to Claire's horror, tossed the 10-carat diamond out into the rainy street below. "Harrison!" she gasped. "That was worth a fortune." "I don't care," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a different box. It was smaller, older. Velvet worn by time. He opened it to reveal a ring that wasn't flashy. It was a vintage piece, a sapphire surrounded by delicate diamonds set in gold. "This was my grandmother's," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. I promised myself I would never give it to anyone unless I was sure I would love them until the day I died." He got down on one knee. The billionaire, the titan, the lone wolf of New York, knelt on the floor of his townhouse amidst packed suitcases. "Claire Bennett," he said, "let's rip up the contract. Let's write a new one. No expiration date. No exit clauses. Just us. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Claire looked at him, tears streaming down her face, washing away the last remnants of the pain Richard had caused, the fear of poverty, the loneliness of the last few years. She looked at the man who had saved her, only to find that she had saved him right back. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, Harrison, yes." He stood up and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Good," he whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Now, unpack your bags. You're home." Outside, the rain continued to fall on New York City, washing the streets clean. Somewhere in a jail cell, Richard Montgomery sat alone. But high up in the townhouse on 64th Street, the lights stayed on all night, warm and golden, signaling to the world that the acting was over, and the real story had just begun. And that is the story of how a public shaming turned into the greatest romance New York had ever seen. Richard thought he could break Claire by stripping her of her status, but he forgot that true value isn't found in a bank account, it's found in character. In trying to bury her, he only planted the seed for her to rise higher than he could ever dream. Claire didn't just find a billionaire, she found a partner who saw her worth when the world was blind. What do you think? Did Richard deserve an even harsher punishment, or was losing everything enough justice? And would you have forgiven Harrison for keeping his feelings hidden for so long? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe for more real-life stories filled with twists and turns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.